So, right off the bat, what's wrong with, in your opinion, with believing in a God, regardless of who the God is?
I think it's false. I think that it's a matter of belief without evidence. And as a scientist and as an educator, I like the idea that we believe things because there's evidence. There's such a lot of evidence available now at the beginning of the 21st century that it's a real shame, it's a tragedy to base your life upon something for which there is no evidence and never was any evidence, when the real truth is so wonderful.
A common objection that a lot of skeptics have to Christianity is that there's no solid, airtight, irrefutable proof that there's a God. But what if there are clues? You know, what if there are these evidences that we can look at that would point to a high plausibility that there is a God?
A clue is being defined as something that serves as a guide or direct in the solution of a problem or mystery. So if it's a mystery to us, whether there's a God or not, we should look to the clues to kind of guide us through. I wanted to address something. Up in the video, a guy by the name of Richard Dawkins, this is a guy who's pretty famous, he writes a lot of books, sells a lot of copies. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, I think it's such a tragedy that people have religious beliefs because it's a belief and there's no evidence for it. Never has been. Whereas he says all the evidence points to what he believes, which of course is evolution. And he says it's a real tragedy that people have religious beliefs when the real truth is so wonderful. This causes me to pose a question. What is so wonderful about it? What is so wonderful about the idea that everyone in this room and everyone in the world are simply products of time, matter, and random chance? Your life has no meaning and there's no intentionality behind your existence. You're just here. And that means that after this life, there's nothing. Mr. Dawkins, with all due respect, what is so wonderful about that? So the first clue is what is called the anthropic principle, or the fine-tuning of the universe. This is the idea that there are specific values in the universe that had to be set at a specific level in order for organic life to be able to exist. I'm going to quote Francis Collins, who is the head of the Human Genome Project. He's a pretty smart guy. He puts it this way: when you look from the perspective of a scientist at the universe, it looks as if it knew we were coming. There are 15 constants, the gravitational constant, the various constants about the strong and weak nuclear force, etc., that have precise values. If any one of these constants was off by even 1 part in a million, in some cases 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to the point where we see it. It's so precise that scientists talk about how the universe, the balance of the universe is on like a knife's edge. They're baffled by it, really. Stephen Hawking, maybe you've heard of Stephen Hawking. He was probably the world's most famous cosmologist. He was a professor at Cambridge for a while. He said, the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. I think there are clearly religious implications. He's saying our universe is so precise, random chance cannot explain it. No, even the most compulsive gamblers will not take the bet with the odds of our universe. Now let me make it clear that Stephen Hawking is not a Christian. He doesn't believe in God in the traditional sense, but he does admit that there's got to be something outside this universe. A universe like ours, simply, it doesn't make sense. As complex as it is, something had to put it in force. Even if the universe wasn't exact, how did it come to be anyway? Like, everyone agrees that the universe had a beginning, but what started it? I know I've heard some philosophers say, well, the universe just caused itself to exist. Now, in order for you to do any action like cause is an action. In order for you to do an action, you have to exist to do it. So how can you exist before you exist? It's not a very logical argument. Second clue of God is morality. Where does our sense of morality come from? How do we know things? How do we know what's right and wrong? And there's a few options. One, that there is an absolute thing as right and wrong, and there is an absolute standard. There is a moral standard given to us by a moral lawgiver. Or there is no such thing as right and wrong. Only what each culture deems to be appropriate for itself. So it's culturally relative. Some people do say that. So we'll look at cultural relativism, because some people would say, you know, it's not black and white. It's just not. It's just not black and white. You know, every culture must decide what's good for itself. But if you would question that person long enough, you would find the thing that they think is just absolutely wrong for everybody. I mean, you can use an example from the Bible. Hey, did you know that there was a pagan culture that used to sacrifice their kids to gods? Everyone's going to think that's wrong. And as soon as you peg them with that, you're like, so there is a moral standard. No one's going to think that that's culturally relative.
Proponents of evolution and philosophical naturalism would say that morality, our common moral sensibilities, are simply something that natural selection has hardwired into our DNA for the sake of survival and to pass on our genetic code. But there's problems with that, and let me give an example. You know, if a guy is drowning in the river and you're standing right there, the moral thing to do would be to go jump into the river and save him. But is that the thing that's going to help you to survive? No, it's really not. So really the only kind of morality that evolution could possibly give us, it would be really relative. In other words, the moral thing to do would be the thing, whatever it took for you to survive. And we know that that's not always the case in reality. So
there is a moral standard, and if there is a moral standard, there's got to be a moral lawgiver. That points to that idea. All right, what's the next clue of God? Beauty.
I believe that we do have a clue that there is a God, and the fact that human beings find things beautiful. And I know that that sounds highly subjective. It sounds, you know, this is where emotions get involved and things like that. But the question still lingers out there, why do we find things beautiful? And I think the options are, one, either there is a God who created beauty to give us a sense of meaning and a sense of longing that only He can fill. Or that the reason that certain people find things beautiful would be like, for example, you find a certain type of scenery to be beautiful because your ancestors, that's the kind of place where your ancestors would find food and shelter and things like that. So it's just kind of neurologically hardwired into you to find that kind of thing attractive. Does anyone really want to believe that? Because you'd have to face it that, you know, if the same is true with love, then on your wedding day, if you hold that worldview, on your wedding day, you'd have to look across, you know, at your spouse and look in their eyes, and you'd have to acknowledge that, well, this thing that I think is love for them is simply something that's hardwired into my DNA for the sake of survival and the passing on of our genetic code. I mean, what about music? Well, I mean, we find music beautiful, and what's the purpose of that? Because it keeps our stress levels down? I mean, this is more than just survival. We find things beautiful because it gives us its meaning.
I'll close it with this. I know that I haven't given you, again, a solid, airtight proof of God. But I think when you take these clues into consideration and you weigh them all together, I think the weight of their argument increases significantly. I think this is a pretty weighty argument. I think it's pretty potent. So to me, the complexity of the universe, the moral sense of mankind, and that we find anything beautiful make much more sense in a universe where God exists than in a universe where God does not exist. And I'll leave it at that.